I try to tell founders and anybody in sales, nobody cares about your product. I'm a founder. I made a drunken decision at a bar 15 years ago, and it started me down a path to running multiple tech businesses. But basically, a story is a way to connect with people on an emotional level that resonates. Usually the story, the ideal is that there's a bit of tension. I think one of the things that I teach is there are a few storytelling frameworks.
All right. Welcome, Zal. Welcome to the Out of Office show. I am extremely happy, extremely excited that you're here. I personally have been watching a lot of your podcasts and following you on LinkedIn, especially your Impact at Scales podcast. And I think what you're doing is phenomenal. How you help founders is phenomenal. There's so much that you do. And today in this episode, we're going to unpack a lot of the insights that you've had when it comes to startups, storytelling, impact investing, VC scenes, all of that. So, are you ready?
I certainly am. Thanks so much, Priya. Pleasure to be here. And yeah, thanks for asking me to come on the show.
I'm super glad. All right, so just kick it off. Just tell us a little bit about your origin story. What got you here? Why are you doing what you're doing?
Good question. So I'm a founder. I made a drunken decision at a bar 15 years ago, and it started me down a path to running multiple tech businesses, which I've done in India and in Singapore, but largely selling software globally at an enterprise level. And that's what I did for about 14, 15 years. And then I think probably COVID, or during that time, I realized that, I think everybody was so impacted by COVID. And I have always been quite passionate about the planet and climate. And I realized that it was a very interesting dress rehearsal if you think about something that is impacting countries across the world universally, not coming from any one place, but so impacting everyone, whether you're rich or poor. It doesn't matter whether you're a Democrat, you're a Republican, whatever it is, this one thing, in the case it was COVID, which required a global response. It was an interesting dress rehearsal for climate change. And at that time, I thought that I needed to do something a little bit more in that space. And so I started mentoring a lot of businesses, and I started mentoring, dozens of founders in that space. And one pattern that I noticed was that a lot of these founders I was noticing similar patterns to what I see with very technical founders, which is they tend to focus on, I call them truth seekers. They tend to be engineers, scientists, researchers, academics, people who for their entire career, engineers looking for the truth. And the truth is powerful. But sometimes just saying the truth is not enough to persuade somebody to take action. And so I was seeing these people that were incredible founders starting great companies, and what they were doing was they weren't getting the funding, or they weren't getting the customers, they weren't getting the partnerships, they weren't finding the employees. And I realized it was because they weren't able to persuade, they weren't able to convince, they weren't able to effectively pitch their story. And so now I work with not just founders in climate anymore. It's kind of grown to, I work with founders in startups in tech. I work with leaders. I work with corporations, all to help people be more persuasive, to be able to communicate and pitch what they want to sell. And, it's funny. I have people that come to me from corporations and they said, oh, you teach pitching. Like, how's that impact us? And I said, well, you in a company, you're spending your whole day trying to get people in other departments to get on board with your initiative, or to work with your project, or to, it's constantly stakeholder management. And so you're constantly trying to convince people as to why they should come along with you for a ride. And so that's what I spend my time doing now, basically coaching founders and leaders to help them be better at that.
Amazing. So I love how you how you went in from starting companies and building B2B SaaS companies to now helping businesses, not just founders, but corporations as well, in this important skill of storytelling. So I want to go a little bit deeper into this. What is really storytelling? Just for the audience who just wants a proper definition, because we hear this here and there all the time. So yeah, what according to you is storytelling?
Well, so I will answer that with maybe a little story, which
Perfect.
is, think if you want to figure out the first time that humans started coming together in groups, you're probably talking about whatever cavemen at that point going out in groups to hunt together. Ultimately, you would end up sitting around this campfire. If you think about what they would say and how they would speak around campfires, what they would share would be stories. And they share stories because our brains are wired to remember stories. That's why movies, that's why TV shows, that's why even songs, poems, they can connect with you just because the story resonates. And the reason why I mention this is because I believe the first signs of writing happened several millennia after that. I believe it was in Sumeria. I believe it. And from what I understand, it was actually used initially as a form of keeping count and auditing of grains and animals. And so the reason why I'm telling you this story is because the auditing of grains and animals, which was the origination of the written word, is data. And that came several millennia after we sat around campfires and told each other stories. And those stories were maybe lessons, or maybe they were how you pass down education or how you pass down history. But the fact is that our brains have been wired for so long to remember that story, to remember to connect it with feelings, much more than data and facts have even been in existence. So, why is storytelling important? I think we've kind of over-indexed a little bit on data. And now, everything is, the numbers are there. And I'm not arguing that you don't use those to make your decisions. But storytelling is for much more when the decision has been made and you are now trying to get people to come along on a journey with you. And what is it that, you have to sell people on a vision. You have to sell people on a belief. You have to, if you look at people now, like Steve Jobs is the one that a lot of people give a lot of credit to. And I think what is incredible is when someone is so convincing that businesses needed to change their policies in order to counterbalance this. So Steve Jobs, with his vendors, there was a rule that you could not sign a deal within 1 week of meeting Steve Jobs. Because in the meeting with you, Steve would have been so persuasive, so convincing, so charming that he would have you believe anything that he wants you to believe, and therefore would convince you that you needed to give him a huge discount or you needed to pay something. So they called it a reality distortion field. And that's really the power, right? Steve Jobs was probably one of the best storytellers in business.
Right.
And you compare that with someone like Bill Gates, who, don't get me wrong, fantastic manager, incredible builder of product and of technology, but less recognized as a storyteller. And then you look at how people respond to both of those brands, right? People might like Microsoft, but people love Apple. There are people out there where Apple is somehow connected to them as a level of identity. They feel something with the brand. They're associated with that brand. You don't see that with Microsoft. You don't see, I mean, for me, the most incredible thing I see is that, and I think this is my 5th or 6th iPhone that I've had. And every time you buy an iPhone or anytime you buy an Apple product, what do they give you? They give you stickers. They give you stickers. They give you stickers, right? They give you Apple stickers for you to stick on things to show that I am an Apple user. I don't I don't see any Samsung stickers or Microsoft stickers or anything like that, right? And it's because Steve Jobs is really amazing at telling a story.
Yeah.
And he was incredible at being able to do that. So when I talk about I know you asked what is a story, but basically a story is a way to connect with people on an emotional level that resonates. Usually the story, the ideal is that there's a bit of tension. I think one of the things that I teach is there are a few storytelling frameworks that you can apply, whether that's the hero's journey, whether that's even the pyramid principle. There are different ways that you can articulate a story. But the idea is to really to share information, but to connect with someone at a human level. And I'm speaking specifically from a business point of view, right?
Yeah.
In the movie business, a story is about how entertaining it can be.
Yeah.
It's a very different kind
And
of
the
story.
drama and everything that goes in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, so very interesting point here. I've got so many questions now. So so let's go a little bit deeper. So when it comes to stories, and you mentioned that we have an over reliance on data today, especially to make business decisions. How does one actually combine data and storytelling in the business context?
Well, the data, there's a fantastic picture that I wish I could show you, and it's in the presentations that I give. And basically what it is, if I describe it, is it's a pile of Lego bricks.
Okay.
Right? And they say that this is data.
Yeah.
And then they say that this is data sorted. And so what they've done is they've put all of the bricks in piles of the same color.
Okay.
And then they tell you that this is data with a story. And then what you see is this beautiful Lego scene of this house with a, countryside. And basically that's what I mean, that you can look at numbers, but the numbers are meaningless unless there's a connection to the real world. And more importantly, the biggest thing that I teach my clients, and I know I've been guilty of this in my life in the past, right? Which is we get hung up on data, but who you are giving that data to, or what does that data mean to your audience, is the most important thing. And so the story is what connects the data with the audience and why the audience should care about that data.
Wonderful.
I'll give you an example. Right? So if you're a startup founder and you're presenting, let's say, your financial forecast, right?
Okay.
That's data, right?
Yeah.
Or your TAM, or whatever it is that you're presenting, right? All of these numbers, I mean, anybody that tells you that a percentage of that number is not made up is lying, because especially with forecasts, nobody knows with any certainty anything more than 6 or 12 months really what's going to happen.
It's
you
really
can make
just
projections,
linear progression.
but it's linear. It's some kind of linear progression based on what you think. Right?
Yeah.
But if you have a story with your pitch as to why you believe that this linear progression is right, and how you believe that the market and different factors are going to come into play to, create the tailwinds, tailwinds that you need to push, your growth this way.
Yeah.
That creates meaning for a VC. That creates the reason why a VC wants to believe that you are going to hit these numbers, because he believes your story and he's bought into it, versus just showing him a chart and saying, we intend to continue to grow up and to the right.
Right. It's data after which, you are basically coming up with the story based on some historical past data or current data and data about the industry. Something
the
that is
story is
not
always about the past, right?
Okay.
So, say what you want about Elon Musk, but he is probably, that guy who is painting the story of the future.
Yeah.
He's the guy that wanted to make electric cars sexy. Now it's it's very obvious to the whole world that, electric cars are going to take over. It just makes sense. But 10, 15 years ago, that wasn't the case, right? Going to Mars, I think most people, if you ask, will we get to Mars in our lifetime? Probably say yes, right? That's become a believable vision for the future.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like if you think about the vision again, and I apologize if I'm using the same example, but you think about the vision of Steve Jobs with the smartphone, and him thinking that firstly, at the time that phones were all going smaller, I'm going to make the phone bigger. In fact, I don't know if you remember, but the precursor to an iPhone was the iPod.
Yeah.
So he
And
had to
1
be the
million songs
person
or something. But yeah.
had to be the person that was like,
Yeah.
hey, look at this Nokia and look at this iPod. What if I smush them together and they have a child? And
Yeah.
I'm going to give this to the market, right? But he had to be able to have that vision for the future. I mean, there are stories about him going back to his suppliers and them having to reinvent particular screws because they could not get the screw to the weight and thinness specification that the iPhone required. Nobody knows whether this company is going to be successful, whether it's going to work. He had a vision, he had a plan for the future. And I think, and maybe it's because I come from the world of startups. Right?
Yeah.
Your vision is something that's on a PowerPoint deck, and then every day you bring that to life, right? That's literally what it is. Like your founders, you come up with a deck, you take that deck to some people, those people believe in you, and then you bring that deck to life, right? And so you have to have that belief in the future. And I think for me, the way that it works is to get people to believe in your story.
Why is it that the technical founders who come from the backgrounds of engineering and science, why are they not that great at storytelling?
I think the short answer is that they have never had to do it in their education, university, in their job. It always is about coming down typically to a number, to a fact, to a decision, to an ultimate truth, or to a correct answer. I think that when you look at some of the other, areas where you have to persuade someone that you are right? You have to convince someone. So the reason why I find that what I call truth seekers, they're not so good at it is because objectively they never needed to do it. Everything could be written down on a piece of paper, and ultimately you were coming to an answer that was right or wrong. Whereas in other subjects, there is no right or wrong answer. There is just sort of how you frame the argument and whether you understood the problem. And so there, it requires a bit more nuance. It requires a bit more understanding. Whereas in my experience, people that are engineers, they're academics, they're researchers, they're scientists, because they're so fact driven, they are, looking at that 1% change. I've had clients come to me and say, Zal, my product is 3.5% more efficient than the current incumbent player. Why are people not using me? I'm 3% more efficient, means I'm better. And I said, yeah, but people buy for lots of different reasons. Efficiency is not just the reason that people buy things. And a lot of times, whether somebody wants to buy their product or not can often come down to whether they like you, the person that's selling it, rather than the product itself. Sometimes you can be like, this person gave me the icks or whatever. Even if what they're selling is great, you don't necessarily want to buy from them. So there are lots of different reasons. And I think that is a hard truth to understand, that you can be correct. You can be more efficient. It can be true that you are more efficient, and still client is not going to buy from you, or an investor is not going to invest in you.
Because at some level, you've not been able to convince them enough that what you're saying is actually truth.
Not truth. That's not the case. People. I'm not saying that people are liars. What I'm saying is that two things, and the two main, with my founder clients, the two main people they're trying to speak to, it's either customers or investors. And frankly, the customers are the one that everybody's trying to speak to. And one of the bits of advice I tell my clients is that you have to have a pitch that is so compelling and so strong that whoever you're pitching to, the problem you are solving has just jumped to become the top 3 problems that he needs to solve. Because if you're a senior person, if you're running a company, if you're looking after a department, a region, whatever it is, everybody's trying to fight for your attention. Everybody's jumping at you with problems. Few people are coming with solutions. And you're trying to convince someone that this problem that I am solving is a top 3 problem that you need to solve. Because if it's not a top 3 problem, then it falls 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 on the list. Okay, that I understand it's a problem and I'll get to it.
Yeah.
But I still have these things I need to get to first before I get to that. Whereas if you are able to persuade me that this is a top 3 problem, then I have no choice but to listen. I have no choice but to at least try to take some action.
I love this. I love this because it's moving the focus from the solution and you being the top 3 amongst whoever else that is pitching to actually moving the priority of the problem. And I love this. And this is specifically very useful because today, when it comes to sustainability, and I'm a sustainability climate tech founder myself, and this is one of the issues. So it is not often in the top 3, maybe on the boardroom, it's like, in the top 3, like just for investor perspective, but down to, let's say, the operators, and we work with factory operators, people who actually have the ability to impact your emissions out there, right? But for them, it's not in the top 3. So how would you do this? How would you move this? I'm just going deeper into this question and this suggestion because I simply loved it. But how would you do that? How would you make something which is not a problem today, or seemingly not a problem today?
Well, okay. Then the question is like, who is it a problem for? And are you going after the right target? Are you going after the right people that see this as a problem? Sustainability is a really tricky one because the thing that I see behind sustainability is that I promise you, there is nobody I know that started a sustainability company because they are not passionate, because they don't care. Nobody that I've met is like, I'm in this to make a quick buck and get out. Like I'm here for all the cash, right? There's nobody I've met in sustainability like that. And the reason why I'm saying this is because oftentimes when you meet people, especially in a work context, the problem becomes that you feel so passionate about the problem you are solving and the industry that you are in. And you're forgetting that if you're selling to an enterprise, you're sitting across the table from somebody who does not necessarily care as passionately about what they are doing as you do. But they are there because they want a career. They do want to get good money. They're looking out for what's next in their career. They want to make sure their family is secure. They want to make sure that their boss likes them, that they're getting their bonus. There are all of these different sides that you have to take into consideration. The planet is not even on the top 10 of his internal priorities. Whereas you, as the founder of this company, it's your top 3. It might be you, yourself, your family, then the planet, right? Like it's probably in that order. And so there can be a huge clash here. Because as soon as that, it's unfortunate, but people in sustainability have been tarred with the same brush as extremists. And when you come out and when you start talking like that, and when you start talking with the passion, I think that either people really love it and they're like, hey, this is great, we want to work with this. Or there is certain people in certain levels of business that maybe don't want to deal with that. And it's about how do you walk that line. And this is where I try to tell founders and anybody in sales, nobody cares about your product. All that anybody cares about is what you do for them. And what does your product do for them? And what are all the ways that it helps them live their life easier, better, freer? Like forget about what you do and focus on these people. And I think in sustainability, we need more of that, right? Because anytime when you're talking about reducing water, when you're talking about reducing energy, when you're talking about reducing waste, when you're talking about reducing just your whatever raw materials that you need to go to create your product, those are all things that have really positive, sustainable attributes and lower the cost of running business,
Correct.
right?
Absolutely.
Are all ways that you can be more sustainable, are all ways that you can do things better and be better for the business. And if you start thinking about things like that, and look, you only have to look at weird cults to see how warped people can get when they are in something. And the reason I say this is because, people that are in the oil business, they don't think they're doing anything wrong, right? They see that their product is being used by billions of people every single day, every minute of every hour of every day, right? They are the lubricant of the world economy. That's the story that they believe of themselves and see themselves. So if you don't tell them something similar, if you tell them that you're evil, if you tell them that you're bad, if you tell them that you're the reason that my children are going to die, well, they're certainly not going to want to do business with you.
True. True. No, very true. I absolutely agree with this. In fact, this is something that we've also been doing since we're an operational intelligence and a sustainability intelligence platform. So it's all come down to this, hey, by using this, the data that you get actually helps you reduce your cost over a period of time, right? If you take the right actions. And I think that sells, I think with anything to do with business, either you're talking about increasing your returns, so which is your revenue, or you are decreasing your cost, or somewhere optimizing so that you can have more of a profit. I think at the end of the day, it's just this, having a dollar.
I mean, that's the world that we live in. I would love to say that we lived in a utopian society where everybody worked for the benefit of everybody. And maybe one day we will get there. But right now, if you want business and you want the levers of business to move and to be motivated to move, either there has to be heavy regulation, carbon taxes, things like CBAN. Those are making companies take action. And I myself know of several large organizations that are now heavily invested in sustainable supply chain businesses as a result of this. Either there is a huge change in consumer demand, which I don't see happening
very soon, not at all.
Not on the scale that it needs to be.
True.
And so, if that's not the case, then you have to speak to a business and you have to speak to them and you have to tell them that, hey, we're going to help you be more profitable if you do this. It's a bit, I always say it's so sad that you have to convince so many people that the stability and plight of the planet that we live on is important. I just, if only I knew how to convince more people that they need to think about that a little bit. I struggle with my own family.
But this is where your storytelling prowess comes in. And that leads me to my next question. So if non-technical, non-storytellers need to practice this, what is one of the best things that a founder can do today to hone this skill?
Well, so, I would say talk to everybody.
Right.
And pitch everybody. Look at every opportunity. And I mean this, my co-founder used to laugh because the product that we sold in my company, Lucep, we were a sales automation platform. So we helped how online sales leads were managed for large companies. And so whenever I would get one of these, sales calls, like someone cold calling me, right? Like from a call center, I would always try to sell them. I would be like, so, what system are you using and how do you find it? What about this and what happens with this? And, and the fact that like I'm trying to sell somebody that's called up to sell me, I was just constantly, and look, that to me is very low value, right? Because if he hangs up the phone, if he says no, it's not a serious client, but it was an opportunity to practice. And I think, there's some fantastic stat about how public speaking is globally the number one fear in the world, and number two is death.
Wow.
Right?
And so number two is what? Death.
Death.
Okay.
So you can see that, like, to tell people that, hey, you need to get out of your comfort
Yeah.
zone. But
Yeah.
I would say that, like, start small,
Yeah.
right? Like, if you have a team, maybe you want to start, instead of doing your team meetings with everybody sitting around a table, maybe you want to start with everybody has to get up and make a quick presentation, about what they're doing this week or what their plans are, what their goals are, whatever. It's
Yeah.
about practice, right? And practice being comfortable. The storytelling aspect, most people only need like 2 or 3 stories, and you kind of end up repeating them all the time. And so the question, it's usually like, why are you doing this? What's your vision
Yeah.
for the future?
Yeah.
That kind of thing. And to be able to compel that, and that just comes with practice.
Yeah. 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 Okay, beautiful. Let's shift our focus a little bit into your insights of founders. And since we've been talking about that, founders and startups in Southeast Asia, what do you think are the challenges that founders face in this side or in this part of the world today? Pick the top three.
I mean, I would say that it's still difficult to get support. And what I mean by support is Southeast Asia, East Asia, South Asia, all of these regions are very communally driven. The example I gave to a friend of mine who was European, I said, can you imagine your mother's brother thinking that they had any sort of say in who you get married to?
Right.
And I said, in India, when you go and meet, a prospective bride or groom for an arranged marriage, you go with not only your parents, but maybe their siblings and their partners, and everybody's opinion ultimately matters, right? And I think that, there's a wonderful Jay Shetty line where he says, to my parents, I had to be a doctor, an engineer, a lawyer, or a failure. And so I think the problem is that the society, whether that's your parents, whether that's your friends, it's not supportive to founders. It's tough on founders.
Yeah.
There's still a lot of, I don't know how you feel about swearing, but there's a fantastic phrase which is like, success is like getting pregnant. Everybody wants to congratulate you, but nobody knows how many times you got to get there, and that's really the case. I feel that, like, this part of the world, everybody has been raised on a very steady diet of you go get a job, you work hard, you get promoted, and then you retire at 65 and enjoy your life. And so there's a lot of, I mean, when we started our company in India in 2009, we used to get parents and in-laws that would be attending interviews with their children or their children's partners, because you have to understand, everybody looks at India now as this tech center, but in 2009 there were no startups there. It was just like, it was the big American tech companies, Microsoft, Accenture. This was before Flipkart, this was before Snapdeal, this was before any of these really big Indian companies had made it. And these parents would be there because they were like, what is this? They didn't believe the company was real. They thought it was a scam. So you have to fight against so much as a startup founder. And I think I'm very fortunate. I'm very fortunate that my parents have always been very supportive. And I don't think they understood what I was doing for the first 6 years. And I think they thought it was a fad. I could, get a real job. But they've always been supportive. And I wouldn't have been able to do this because I remember very clearly, before I started my first company, which was in India, I called up my parents and I asked them, if this fails, like, do I have a place to sleep and some food to eat? And I'm lucky that they said yes. And I had to take them up on that, because after 2 years in India, like most good startups, first startups anyway, they didn't work out. And so I had to come back and lived at home for a while, And I think being able to do that and not have shame and not be embarrassed, all of these things are why I think there's such a problem. And also there's like, companies in Asia don't want to take the risk of going with a startup. They don't want to
Yeah.
take the risk of working with them. They would rather pay much more and go for the big companies
Yeah.
because they're risk averse. And
Right.
it's okay. That's just a cultural thing. But
Yeah.
there's and then don't even get me started on the funding and the exits in this market, because it's a struggle, and in the US you can take a deck, and if it's a good deck and you've got some good founders, you can raise a lot of money. Here there's a lot of control in the hands of investors, because there's so many startups and so little money.
Yeah. What do you think about the scene of impact investing in Southeast Asia?
I mean, frankly, I don't know more about impact investing, because to me, impact investing tends to be funds that impact in social enterprise
Right.
more than investing in companies that want to have an impact. So
Right.
I don't really
Right.
know so much about the social enterprise space. I do know
Yeah.
that in terms of like climate tech and that
Mm.
space,
Mm.
what we need in that space that we haven't had yet are several significant exits
Mm.
where people can, I mean, I'm sure that if you start an AI company now, there's
Yeah.
a better than 20% chance someone's going to acquire you if you do a couple of the right things, because every company is so terrified of AI that they just want to get involved.
Yeah.
I don't see that with climate. I don't see people making acquisitions to bring on a particular technology because they think that it's going to disrupt their industry, or because they think it's such a growing market that they want to then take that out to a wider business. You need that kind of liquidity in the industry or liquidity in the environment to then keep the next set of founders going,
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think we especially in the sort of climate space, I don't think we've seen many of those yet.
Okay. Okay. And so where do you think this liquidity and these exits would come from if it were to?
I mean, I wish I knew, because they're not honest. If you look at Europe and the US, apart from ESG data companies like Sustaino1 and some of these
Yeah.
that have been purchased by reporting companies like Moody's and S&P, which
Yeah.
are just adding like an ESG reporting component to the business that they're already selling.
Yeah.
I haven't heard of a lot, and maybe it's because we're very early.
Yeah.
I was a bit too young to know what the sort of pre 2000 tech bubble looked like. I know there were a lot of IPOs. Typically, Asia does not have such a good IPO market, but I don't know if there was a lot of A action. So Asia as well has a different structure, in the sense that if you look at most of the largest companies, especially in Southeast Asia and like Korea, they tend to all be like these huge family conglomerates.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
most of them would rather say, if they see a business they like, the attitude tends to be much more of, I'll just build it myself versus buying it.
Buying it.
Like
Yeah.
whether that's buying it as a software vendor, like to use, or to just acquire the business. And I mean, we got that told to us so many times in India. We would go
Right.
pitch a business. They'd say, guys, I love it. I've got 20 developers sitting in a room that are doing nothing.
Yeah.
I'm just going to go tell them to build it for me,
Right.
And so
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
that's an attitude mind shift, which I don't know if that comes or not.
I get this, because it's not just a build versus make decision anymore. It's actually a build versus buy decision. No. Yeah. So wait, build versus acquire decision. So it's not a build versus buy decision from buy the software in the sense, but build versus acquire, which I feel, in the US you can see even startups buying other startups, and
Well,
they
I
just
mean,
acquire.
I know it's a different business and all of that, but when you think about how big Instagram was when it got acquired,
Yeah.
it was like 5 people, 18 months old, and they
Yeah.
spent $1 billion, and now
Yeah.
that billion looks like bargain of the century.
Yeah.
Even the 25 billion that was spent on WhatsApp, again, seems to be a great bargain. He's got access and eyes to half the planet, but that's
Yeah.
not how this part of the world looks. It
Right.
doesn't tend to see
Yeah.
it like that.
And now with this whole, being AI being in the space where people are able to build also more fast. So it's no more even make versus buy. Things are moving towards just, okay, we'll just make. Not because we have just 20 people, even with 5 people, we can make.
And I wonder, and you're right. And I think that I wonder if what you're going to see is a little bit like what happened with mobile apps, where mobile
Yeah.
apps got really niche. And, because it became very, it wasn't so long ago that to build a mobile app cost $20,000. And eventually you could no code it. You could do what did we have? We had web apps. So became a lot easier to develop these apps. And the apps started becoming, they started generating income. One of the guys
Yeah.
at HubSpot, I think he was the CTO.
Yes.
Do you know what Wordle is?
No. No.
Wordle is like this game in the US that's very popular where they
Yes.
give you a
Okay.
word and you have to guess
Yeah.
that word.
Yeah.
But it
Yeah.
only
Yeah.
comes out once a day. And he decided that once a day was not enough. And so he came up with something else that was more often than that. And that's generating like $80,000 a month for him.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think there's going to be opportunity for you to develop sort of micro niched tailored AI tools for an industry that maybe only sells to a few hundred or a few thousand people, but they're willing to pay you, $20 a month for it because they get so much value out of it.
True, true. So niche is the strategy. And I feel for acquisition, do you think that having that data and that the data that is there, which would, see, you could make an app, right, today, very quickly. But for you to capture that market share and that audience, it's going to take time. So if you really want to utilize that data, which is hard to get, let's assume, then I guess acquisition makes sense. What do you think?
Well,
about
I
this?
think, there was a company recently I read about that
Yeah.
had the largest repository of cat DNA data.
Very niche, very hard to get.
So basically the company started during COVID,
Yeah,
and obviously everybody was at home,
yeah,
blah, 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 looking for things to do. And I think it recently it might have been to Sony of all companies, sold for like $1 billion+ because they wanted that. Because never again are you going to have that people at home with nothing to do. So they're going to send you their cat DNA, right? Like it's unlikely to happen. And so they just wanted that data. And you're right. Maybe the data is what is valuable, but ultimately people have to know what to do with that data. My guess is that's why, people are trying to get as much on, they want you speaking to them as much as possible because humans don't communicate. Like to be able to communicate through a keyboard it's got to go from my brain to my hand, from my hand to the keyboard, to the keyboard, to the screen, from the screen to somebody else. So it's a whole process versus when you speak. I mean, I don't know about you, but I use the Chat GPT function with the chat.
Yeah.
And,
Voice.
the way that I'm able to articulate myself verbally is much better than I am even trying to write what I think.
Very interesting. So coming to the last final point, or last final question, we've been talking, we started from business storytelling to about the scene in Southeast Asia. So should founders in this part of the world focus on if they are to build something? Of course, I mean, you should start from the problem, but what verticals or what tactics work here the best?
I mean, look, if I had that answer, I think I'd probably be a billionaire. But, the one thing that I think, and it kind of goes along the lines of what we had talked about, the difficulty funding, the difficulty of getting an M&A.
Yeah.
So, how far, or if you're building a business, how long before you are profitable? If you're telling me that the sign of your success is that in 5 years you're raising a Series C, then I don't know how successful that business is going to be in this part of the world. Because when you get to that point where you're raising Series B, Series C, typically your only exit is an IPO or an acquisition.
Yeah.
And both of those don't happen that much in this part of the world. Whatever vertical that you are looking at, try to understand, how do you make money? And is your business profitable? And I know that might not sound sexy, and I know that might not sound like, but the question is that if you're able to prove in the VC term, the unit economics of your business, then people will give you money,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
If you can show that you're a profitable business and that you have the ability to scale and you have the ability to grow, the reason why VCs like software so much is because I can write one line of code, or I can write not line, but however many billion lines of code, and that can be sold 100 million times at no additional cost.
Yes. Yeah.
You know,
there's no gross
Google
cost.
there's no like Google having 10 people search it, or 10,000 people search it, or 10 million people search it. Apart from compute power, there's no real cost that is associated with that change, and that's why they love it, right? And it is amazing. And there are quite a few software companies that have come out of this part of the world and are successful, but most of them have been direct to consumer apps or direct to consumer businesses.
Right.
We're not really seeing the big, like, multi-billion dollar B2B businesses. I've seen a few in India, but all of them target North America. They target Europe. They all target outside of this part of the world. So I think that might change. And in the we're going to probably see, as Asia becomes a bigger part of the global economy, a more dominant part of the global economy. I'm not even talking about China, right? I'm talking about Southeast Asia. China's a different beast altogether.
Yeah.
But we will see some homegrown tech. It's just not really come yet. So if I was to say, like, think about your company as a business, not as something where you need to go and raise millions and millions and millions of dollars to keep your business floating.
Yeah. Got it. So basically, go back to your first principles. Focus on your P&L.
Focus on the P&L.
Fantastic. Well, great.
What is it? The famous line from Warren Buffett, which is there's two rules. Rule number 1 is don't lose money from shareholders. And rule number 2 is don't forget rule number 1.
I love this. I never knew this, though. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Zal, for imparting so much wisdom to us as well as the audience who's here to listen to the Out of Office show. I feel that the conversation was way too small and way too short. I would love to have yet another, episode at a later point in time where we can do a longer one and go deeper into things. But thank you so much. What is the best way that founders can reach out to you, or any other corporates can reach out to you, whoever?
I think the best way is on LinkedIn. My name is Zal Dastur.
Okay.
There are probably very few people with that name on the planet. So I should be quite easy to find on LinkedIn.
Okay, fantastic. With that, ladies and gentlemen, if you have any questions around business storytelling or you need Zal's help, then definitely reach out to him and keep watching the Out of Office show. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Priya. This was great.